The sun was just dipping behind the jagged hills of eastern Texas, casting long shadows across the dusty trails that wound through the cotton fields and pine forests. The air smelled of smoke from distant chimneys and the faint tang of iron from the river beyond the hills. Townsfolk were already closing their shutters, wary of strangers, wary of the stories that had begun to circulate. There was a bounty posted in every trading post, every blacksmith shop, every crossroads. A man had escaped. Not just any man, but one they whispered about in hushed tones. A marksman who had survived the Civil War and now seemed to have vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind bodies and bloodstains as proof of his skill. Caleb Rourke had been in the hunting business longer than most men could remember. He was lean, broad-shouldered, and roughened by decades of tracking men and animals alike. His face, tanned and lined by the sun, bore a permanent scowl that only deepened when his temper flared. He had been the first to see the notice posted in the town of Liberty, pinned to the post office board like a challenge from the gods themselves. 500 for the capture of the man called the Ghost Sniper. Dead or alive? Caleb's eyes had lingered over the words for a long moment, tracing the inked letters, imagining the weight of that bounty in his palm. It was more than money. It was prestige, reputation, the kind of payoff that could make him untouchable among the network of slave hunters who thrived in the chaos of war and its aftermath. He had gathered his crew swiftly, men who shared his ruthlessness, greed, and desire for notoriety. There was Boone, the fastest rider among them, whose hands were as steady with a rifle as they were cruel in the fields. Nash, broad and grim, whose temper could spark at the slightest provocation. Cutter, wiry and sly, with a reputation for never missing a target. And Walker, young and eager enough to overlook caution. Each of them had heard the whispers of the Ghost Sniper, but none had lived to see him, or at least none had admitted it. Rumors traveled faster than the men themselves, spreading tales of a soldier-turned-fugitive who could strike from impossible distances, appearing and disappearing like smoke. That night the group met at the edge of the forest, where shadows pooled in the hollows and the wind carried a chill that hinted at the coming winter. Caleb lit a small lantern, its flickering flame revealing faces set with determination and apprehension. The men mounted their horses, the leather of their saddles creaking, the scent of sweat and horses mixing with the faint dust of the trail. "We ride until we find him," Caleb said, voice low but commanding. "And when we do, we don't waste time, dead or alive. That's the bounty, understand?" The men nodded, though a flicker of doubt passed over Nash's eyes, quickly masked by a grunt. Boone shifted in the saddle, scanning the darkened trees as if expecting to see someone already watching them. Cutter's thin lips pressed together, his mind calculating every possible scenario. Walker, trembling slightly, managed only a weak "yes, sir," before gripping the reins so tightly his knuckles whitened. The first hours of their pursuit were uneventful, save for the sounds of the forest at night. Crickets chirped, branches snapped under the weight of unseen animals, and the occasional owl hooted in the distance. Caleb led the way, following the vague tracks he had spotted on the dirt trails earlier that afternoon, the prints of a man and horse fading into the thick pine litter. His eyes were trained to notice every disturbance, the broken twig, the bent grass, the faint scuff of leather. He had tracked men through far worse, but there was something different about these signs. They were precise, intentional, like the man they hunted had known they were coming and had chosen his path carefully. By midnight, they had reached a small creek, the water murmuring softly in the darkness. Boone dismounted first, his rifle already in hand. The others followed. Caleb crouched, examining the mud along the banks. Footprints, fresh footprints. Not just human, but horse tracks too, pressed deep into the soil as if the rider had been moving quickly. Caleb traced the impressions with his finger. "Fast," he muttered, "and careful, too careful." Cutter knelt beside him, leaning in close. "He wants to be found," he said. "He's leading us somewhere." Caleb didn't answer. His instincts told him the same thing. Something about this trail was deliberate, like a predator drawing its prey into a trap, and yet the lure was irresistible. The bounty, the thrill, the pride of capturing a man who had outsmarted armies, it all pressed upon him, sharpening his focus and masking the unease gnawing at the edges of his mind. The hunters made camp near the creek, keeping a low fire. Caleb's eyes never left the tree line, scanning for movement, listening for the faintest sound of misstep or misfire. Boone checked the rifle, Nash sharpened a blade, and Cutter pored over the tracks once more. Walker sat apart, shivering, staring into the fire as if willing it to answer the questions he didn't dare ask aloud. It was then that the first shot rang out. Not far, maybe 100 yards away, but it came with a precision that made the hair rise on Caleb's neck. The sound cut through the forest, echoing against the trees and disappearing into the darkness. "What the hell?" Nash began. Caleb held up a hand, signaling silence. His eyes scanned the tree line, trying to pierce the shadows. There was no movement, no glow, nothing. And yet the men knew, without saying it, that they were being watched. "Careful," Caleb whispered. "He's out there, and he knows we're here." Boone tightened his grip on the rifle. "You sure he's human?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He wanted to reassure them, to dismiss it as a warning shot fired from a hidden hunter, but deep in his gut, he knew the stories he had laughed off in town were true. This man was no ordinary marksman. He had survived the Civil War, earned the nickname Ghost Sniper among both Confederate and Union soldiers, and now roamed the frontier, a phantom with a rifle and a vendetta. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of smoke and wet earth. Caleb rose slowly, rifle raised, eyes sweeping the tree line. The darkness seemed to close in, pressing down on them, alive with anticipation. Cutter muttered under his breath about traps, Boone murmured prayers, and Walker gripped his knees, silently wishing he had never joined the hunt. Hours passed, and the forest remained ominously quiet. Then came the next sign, a single arrow embedded in the trunk of a tree, its tip blackened and sharpened. Not far from it, a mark had been carved into the bark, a symbol Caleb recognized from old war reports, an insignia that had once belonged to a Confederate sharpshooter. The Ghost Sniper. Caleb's chest tightened. He had thought he knew how to track men. He had thought he knew how to survive the woods. But now he realized that this was not a man who could be cornered by cunning or numbers. This was a ghost who hunted like the wind, striking before the mind could comprehend it. He turned to his men. "We move at first light," he said quietly. "Stay close. Don't stray. And whatever you do, don't fire until you see him." Boone and Cutter nodded. Though Boone's eyes betrayed fear he would not voice. Nash grunted, attempting courage, while Walker's lips trembled as he whispered, "I don't like this." Caleb ignored him. Fear was useless now. What mattered was strategy, patience, and survival. The fire burned low. The creek murmured softly. Shadows moved just beyond the light, and somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness, the Ghost Sniper watched, waited, and prepared. The bounty had drawn hunters into his world, but he was no ordinary prey. He was a soldier forged in war, a phantom molded by vengeance, and a mark that would not be taken lightly. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the treetops, Caleb and his men were ready to follow the trail, unaware that the man they sought was already 2 steps ahead. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of the wind, every shadow among the leaves was another move in a deadly game they didn't fully understand. And as they rode into the forest, chasing the Ghost Sniper, the hunters were already becoming the hunted. The wind carried a warning they could not yet hear, a signal older than the forest itself. Some men cannot be tracked, some ghosts cannot be caught, and some legends survive by becoming the nightmare of those foolish enough to pursue them. The forest swallowed them whole, and somewhere in the shadows the Ghost Sniper smiled. The morning fog clung to the forest like a damp cloak, weaving through the twisted trunks of oaks and pines, and the hunters moved cautiously along the narrow trail, every step softened by moss and decomposing leaves. The world felt muted, grey, almost unreal, as if the forest itself had inhaled the sun and held it at bay. Caleb Rourke led, rifle poised, eyes scanning the shadows. Behind him, Boone, Nash, Cutter, and Walker followed in tense silence, their horses' hooves whispering against the wet earth. The trail was faint but unmistakable, deep hoofprints pressed into the mud, scuffed earth where a man had dragged his boot, and the occasional mark of a rifle barrel dragging along a tree branch. Caleb studied each carefully, tracing the direction with a practiced eye. "He's fast," Boone muttered, voice barely above the soft creek burble beside them. "Faster than any man I've ever tracked." Caleb didn't respond immediately. His gut told him Boone was right. He had followed many men through forests, across rivers and over hills, but this man, this ghost sniper, was something else. Every print suggested movement that was deliberate yet evasive, as if the hunter anticipated their every approach. "Careful," Caleb said at last. "We're walking into a trap." Cutter snorted softly, tugging at his jacket to tighten the grip on his knife. "A trap? This forest is a trap. He didn't make it. We're walking blind, Rourke." "Better blind than dead," Caleb said, not looking back. Walker shivered. "I don't like this. Not one bit." The forest seemed to respond to Walker's words, shadows twisting along the ground, branches bending slightly as though leaning closer to listen. Even Boone, whose face was usually stone, glanced over his shoulder nervously. Hours passed. The sun broke through in thin streams of light, and the mist began to dissipate, revealing more of the woods. Caleb noted subtle changes. The trees were denser, the underbrush thicker, fallen logs forming natural obstacles. The terrain slowed them, and every time a horse stumbled or a branch snapped beneath a boot, all 5 men froze, listening for any sound of movement beyond their own. Then it happened. A faint snapping from the underbrush ahead, too precise to be random. Caleb raised his rifle slowly, every muscle coiled. The others followed suit. Nash's hand trembled as he gripped his pistol. Boone's eyes were sharp, scanning for the glint of metal or the shadow of a man. The snap came again, then a whisper of wind carrying the distinct scent of smoke and wet earth. "Something's here," Caleb said, voice low. "Watch everything." They moved forward carefully, following the trail that seemed to shift with every step. Footprints appeared briefly, then vanished as if erased by the forest itself. Then a shot rang out, not near but far enough to make the air vibrate and the leaves tremble. Boone's eyes widened. "He's taunting us." Caleb did not answer. He felt it in his bones. The ghost sniper was not just hiding, he was observing, waiting, testing them. Every bullet fired from his rifle had precision, intent. This was no ordinary marksman. This was a man trained to think several moves. E'd using the environment as part of his weapon. The hunters pressed on, tension growing with every step. The trail led them into a small valley where the trees leaned inward, forming a natural tunnel of shadows. Here, the mist thickened again, curling around their legs and the horses' hooves like living tendrils. Caleb motioned for them to dismount. "On foot," he whispered. "Horses make too much noise. Stay close and keep your rifles ready." The men obeyed, moving in a single line. The forest swallowed the sounds of their movements, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that every sound they made echoed louder than it should, carried into the darkness beyond. Then Boone froze, raising a hand. "There." Caleb followed his gaze. A faint glimmer of metal nestled in the crook of a tree, reflecting sunlight. A single rifle barrel, camouflaged with mud and leaves. "He's watching," Caleb muttered, "and he wants us to see him." Cutter gritted his teeth. "Then let's make him pay for it." Caleb shook his head. "No, we don't shoot unless we see him moving, unless we have a clean shot. He's baiting us." The tension stretched as minutes passed. Birds stirred in the branches overhead, but the forest remained otherwise silent. Then a soft whistle echoed from somewhere deep in the woods, low, deliberate, almost melodic. Walker flinched violently. "What was that?" "It's him," Caleb said. "He's here, don't move." Boone swallowed hard, eyes scanning. "Why whistle?" Cutter muttered. "To scare us, maybe, or to lure us into a mistake." Caleb nodded. "Exactly, and we're not going to make that mistake." The trail opened into a clearing and the men paused. Here the ghost sniper had left signs, broken twigs forming a pattern, small piles of stones arranged in odd shapes, marks on the trees that indicated previous movements. Caleb knelt, tracing the ground with his fingers. "He's setting the stage," Caleb said quietly. "This isn't random. Every detail, every mark, it's all part of his plan. He wants us to follow." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Nash spat into the dirt. "I don't like following ghosts, Rourke. I've tracked men before, but this—" Caleb didn't answer. He only nodded forward, signaling to continue. Hours turned into midday. The sun burned higher, yet the forest shadows remained thick, suffocating. Every step brought new signs, footprints disappearing suddenly, broken leaves that didn't match the direction of travel, distant gunshots that echoed from no discernible source. The men began to whisper among themselves, tension mounting. Boone, always the first to react, muttered, "He's learning us, watching our patterns." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's why we move slowly, careful, and never together. He expects us to cluster. He expects mistakes." Walker shivered again. I don't think I can keep this up. Every shadow, every sound, it's like he's everywhere at once. You have to, Caleb said firmly. We've come too far. Turn back now, and you die just the same, only slower and hungrier for fear. By late afternoon, the trail led them to a ridge overlooking a wide river valley. Caleb raised his binoculars and scanned the far bank. Nothing, not a flicker, not a sound. Yet the tracks continued, crossing the shallow waters as if carried by some invisible hand. Cutter knelt beside Caleb. How is this even possible? Skill, Caleb said, and experience. He's been trained by war. You think the battlefield teaches strategy, but it teaches patience, stealth, how to manipulate fear. And he's using it against us. A sudden rustle in the brush startled them. The horses shied, and all 5 men froze. Caleb's heart thumped violently. Slowly, carefully, he raised his rifle and scanned the undergrowth. Nothing, just the wind brushing leaves against each other. But the men all felt it, eyes on them, watching, calculating. Move, Caleb whispered. Careful. They continued, descending into the river valley. Here the landscape anged. The river cut through the earth like a scar, with steep banks on either side. Trees were taller, roots exposed, mud deep and sucking at boots and horses alike. Caleb's instinct screamed that they were being led into a choke point, but the ghost sniper was not done. A shot rang out, a single precise strike that hit the riverbank a foot from Nash. He stumbled back, eyes wide with terror. Boone's rifle went up instantly, firing in the direction of the shot, but only the echo of a rifle returned. That's him, Boone said, voice tight. The ghost sniper. He's teaching us, Caleb said. This isn't random. Every shot is a warning. Every mark is intentional. Walker trembled, clutching his rifle as if it were a talisman. I don't want to die here. Cutter's jaw set. We won't die if we don't make a mistake. Just follow Rourke. The hunters pressed forward, the river to their left, trees tightening on their right. Every step required vigilance. Every glance could reveal an ambush. Caleb's mind raced through possibilities, predicting the sniper's next move, trying to stay one step ahead. Yet the man had been trained to anticipate the trained. Every trap they thought they avoided seemed already accounted for. By dusk, they reached another clearing, a shallow ridge leading to a narrow pass. Caleb paused. The signs were clear. The ghost sniper had led them here on purpose. Broken branches, scuff marks, and faint footprints indicated a man who was fast, clever, and lethal. He's testing us, Caleb said quietly, and now we're going to find out how far. A final shot cracked through the clearing, hitting a tree between Caleb and Boone. Wood splintered, and a cloud of dust rose. Boone's face went pale. Time to move, Caleb shouted, and as the men pressed forward, shadows moved through the trees with impossible speed. Every instinct screamed they were no longer hunters, they were prey. The ghost sniper had them exactly where he wanted. Night fell fast, heavier than the hunters expected, swallowing the river valley in a darkness that pressed against the eyes and ears. Caleb led his men through the narrow pass, their boots crunching against gravel and leaves, every sense straining to catch the faintest movement. The fog rolled in again, curling low along the riverbank, turning the familiar landscape into a shadowed maze. Boone rode beside Caleb, whispering, I don't like this. Every shadow, every rustle, he's everywhere. Caleb did not answer immediately. He had learned long ago that fear was contagious. If he allowed it to show, it would spread like wildfire, but inwardly he felt it too. This man they hunted was not just elusive, he was a phantom, a predator shaped by war and vengeance. The first shot rang out suddenly, splitting the air. It was so precise, so silent in its intent, that the bullet hit a tree mere inches from Nash's shoulder. The impact splintered the bark, sending a cloud of dust into the fog. The men flinched, instincts flaring. Boone swung his rifle, aiming at the tree line. Nash cursed, drawing his pistol. Not him yet, Caleb whispered, voice tight. He's testing us. Cutter's face was pale under the lantern glow of the moon, his hands gripping his knife until the knuckles whitened. Testing? He just shot near us. Caleb's jaw tightened. Exactly. He wants us to move, to react, to make a mistake. That's how he kills. They pressed forward cautiously. The river ran to their left, a low murmur in the fog, and the terrain narrowed. Trees pressed close on the right, their roots tangled in the mud, forming natural tripwires. Every step required attention, every breath measured. Then a faint whistle carried through the fog, a low melodic note that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Walker froze, clutching his rifle. "It's him, I know it, he's here." "Keep moving," Caleb said firmly. "Don't stop. Don't even think about stopping." A sudden rustle erupted from the right side of the trail. Caleb pivoted, bringing his rifle up, but there was nothing visible, just shadows that moved as though the trees themselves had shifted. Another shot cracked, grazing Boone's shoulder, tearing through leather and flesh, and Boone cried out, reeling back. "Fall back!" Caleb shouted, but there was no chance to retreat. The terrain was narrow, the river limited their escape. Every step forward brought them closer to where the ghost sniper wanted them. The first attack was brutal and swift. Cutter, attempting to flank the supposed position of the sniper, felt a sharp impact in his side and collapsed, gasping. Nash fired blindly into the fog, but each shot seemed to pass through emptiness. The sniper's position could not be pinned. Each angle they chose was anticipated. "He's a soldier," Caleb muttered under his breath. "He's done this before, probably to men who thought themselves invincible." Walker trembled violently, backing into Caleb. "We're going to die. He's not human." Boone steadied himself, teeth gritted, but Caleb's words cut through the panic. "Listen to me. We're not dead yet. We survive by moving, by staying together, by thinking 2 steps ahead of him. Understand?" The men nodded reluctantly. Caleb motioned them forward again. Every movement was deliberate, cautious, slow. But the fog and the sniper's clever placement of shots forced their pace into a crawl. The whistle came again, closer this time. It was deliberate, taunting, an almost musical mockery of their fear. Then came the first direct confrontation. A figure emerged briefly from the fog atop a ridge, a man, tall, motionless, the rifle cradled against his shoulder. Caleb's heart skipped. The ghost sniper had allowed them a glimpse, enough to strike fear, enough to prove he was there, but never long enough to be targeted. Cutter struggled to rise, shouting, "Shoot him! Shoot him now!" "Wait!" Caleb hissed. "No, we fire only when we see movement, when we're certain. Otherwise—" His voice trailed, unspoken. "Otherwise we die." The sniper moved like smoke. In the blink of an eye, he vanished into the fog, leaving only the echo of his presence. The men's nerves screamed, Boone's hand shook on his rifle, Nash muttered curses under his breath, and Walker began to cry quietly. Caleb, though, forced himself to focus. He had seen soldiers like this before, men who could disappear into trees and mist, and the only way to survive was patience. The terrain began to slope downward, leading them into a dense cluster of cedars. Every footfall was measured, every breath held, and yet the sniper's mastery became apparent in small details. A snapped twig where none should have been, a faint depression in the mud, a subtle change in the fog's movement. He was everywhere and nowhere at once. A shot rang again. This one struck Boone in the calf, sending him to the ground. Caleb reached him instantly, gripping his shoulder, dragging him behind a fallen log. Nash fired blindly, screaming, but there was no reply, no figure to strike, only silence and mist. "This is madness," Nash said, voice shaking. "We're walking into death." "No," Caleb said quietly, tone tight. "We're walking into his trap, and we survive it, or die trying. Move."
Fast on, dragging Boone with them, the sniper's game had begun in earnest.
Every rock, tree, and mound was a potential trap. Caleb realized that the sniper had calculated their strengths and weaknesses, designed the terrain to expose the slow and the fearful, and forced them into corners where only one mistake would be fatal. By late night, exhaustion had set in. Boone's leg was bleeding. Nash's shoulder throbbed from the recoil of too many desperate shots. Cutter's side ached from his wound. Walker was pale and trembling, and Caleb himself felt every muscle screaming for rest. Yet they could not stop. The sniper's presence was too close, too imminent. Then the sound came, a slow, deliberate crack of a branch, followed by a faint whistle. Melodic, taunting. The men froze instantly. The ghost sniper was near. Caleb whispered, "Stay low, don't make a sound, wait for him to show himself." For several minutes the fog seemed to pulse around them. Every nerve in Caleb's body was alert. And then, as if the mist itself had parted, a figure appeared, a man, tall, lean, rifle in hand, moving with an unnatural fluidity. His face was obscured by shadow, but his eyes, pale and sharp, caught the moonlight. He fired, one shot perfect, deadly. Cutter was the first to fall. The bullet struck his chest before he could even react. The men's hearts froze. Nash and Boone returned fire blindly, but the sniper was already gone, vanished into the fog like a phantom. "God help us," Walker whispered. "We can't survive this." Caleb pressed a hand to Walker's shoulder. "We survive because we adapt. We survive because we're still alive. We do not panic. Do you hear me?" Walker nodded weakly. The sniper's attacks continued through the night, shots that came from impossible angles, from nowhere, from everywhere at once. Each shot tore at the hunter's confidence, each near miss a reminder of their mortality. Boone's leg was wounded further, Nash's shoulder burned, and Caleb's arms shook from holding the rifle too long. But still, they pressed forward, following the trail, because turning back meant death. At one point, the sniper revealed himself briefly on a ridge above the river, his rifle raised, firing a single precise shot that sent a rock flying between Caleb and Boone. The sniper's eyes, pale and cold, met Caleb's for the briefest instant, and Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. This man knew him. He understood his methods, his thinking, even his instincts. The realization struck Caleb fully. The ghost sniper was not just skilled, he was trained to anticipate trained hunters. Every trap, every whistle, every shot had been calculated. The sniper was not hunting blindly, he was controlling the entire battlefield, turning the forest into his weapon. By the early hours of dawn, the hunters were broken. Boone was barely able to walk, dragging his injured leg. Cutter was dead, Nash bleeding and delirious, Walker on the verge of collapse, and Caleb, though still standing, was exhausted, his mind spinning with the impossible precision of the ghost sniper. And then came the final shot of the night. A single deafening crack echoing across the valley. It hit Nash squarely in the chest, throwing him into the mud. Caleb screamed, rage and fear coiling in his chest. The ghost sniper's presence vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Silence fell over the forest, thick and suffocating. Caleb knelt beside Nash, checking for signs of life, but it was too late. Boone whimpered beside him, Walker sobbing quietly behind a tree, and Caleb's hands shook with fury and dread. The ghost sniper had made his point. The hunters who thought themselves predators were nothing but prey. Caleb's mind raced. He had pursued men through forests, rivers, and battlefields, but never had he felt so powerless, so hunted. He realized then that the man they tracked was not just a soldier, not just a marksman. He was a force of vengeance, a phantom shaped by war, cruelty, and survival. By dawn, the forest had claimed 3 of his men. Caleb dragged Boone along the trail, every step heavy with exhaustion and terror, knowing that the ghost sniper could strike at any moment from any angle. He knew the hunter had become the hunted, and there was no turning back. The forest seemed alive, whispering and breathing around them. Every shadow was a threat, every sound a warning, and Caleb understood with icy certainty that the ghost sniper would not stop, not until every man who dared hunt him had either fled, fallen, or been broken completely. They moved westward, toward the river's bends, toward unknown territory, toward a reckoning Caleb could feel pressing closer with every step. The ghost sniper was patient. He was inevitable. And the night had already begun to write the story of hunters who became the hunted. The forest around them seemed to thicken as if it had grown while they slept, branches tangling in impossible ways, roots rising like the fingers of buried corpses. Caleb dragged Boone along the muddy trail, the young man's blood seeping through his trousers and staining the ground. Walker trailed behind them, pale and trembling, eyes wide, while Caleb carried the weight of knowing they were being stalked at every step. Nash was gone. Cutter was gone. Boone was barely clinging to consciousness, and above them, somewhere in the shadows, the ghost sniper watched, waited, orchestrating every movement with a precision that made the forest itself seem alive. They reached a shallow clearing where the fog had thinned just enough to see a stretch of the trail ahead. Caleb paused, scanning the tree line, listening. The morning was quiet, almost unnaturally so, but he had learned that silence in the presence of someone like the ghost sniper was far more dangerous than noise. Every step forward could be a trigger, every branch a weapon, every leaf a signal. "Keep him steady," Caleb whispered to Walker, gesturing to Boone. "Don't let him collapse. Don't let him make a sound." Walker nodded, though his hands shook violently as he supported Boone. The injured man groaned softly, slipping closer to the ground with every step. Caleb could feel panic rising in him, a tight knot in his chest, but he forced it down. Panic was exactly what the ghost sniper wanted. Panic would kill them faster than bullets ever could. The trail sloped downward toward the river valley, the earth damp, the mud sucking at their boots. Caleb had to think quickly. He could feel the sniper's presence in every movement of the trees, every shifting shadow. The faintest sound of a snapping twig made him flinch. Then, without warning, a shot cracked through the clearing. Caleb dove behind a fallen log, dragging Boone with him. The bullet struck a tree where Boone had stood a second ago, sending splinters flying. Boone whimpered. "That's it," Caleb shouted, his voice barely carrying over the rush of adrenaline. "We're on his terms now, he's leading us." Boone's eyes were wide with terror, and Walker swallowed hard. "Where does he want to lead us?" Walker asked. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but we follow the trail, and we survive. That's all we do." The trail twisted and turned through dense underbrush, forcing the hunters into single file. Every step was deliberate, measured. The forest seemed to conspire against them, roots tangling, fallen logs blocking paths, and branches reaching out like claws. Caleb realized the ghost sniper was manipulating the terrain itself, using the forest as both shield and weapon. A faint whistle drifted through the trees. Caleb froze, signaling the men to stop. The whistle came again, closer this time, and he felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The sniper was near, watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. Suddenly, a branch snapped sharply to their right. Caleb's rifle rose instinctively, but the figure he sought was gone. Another whistle, longer, almost taunting. The men were trapped in a game they did not understand. Every rustle, every movement was orchestrated by a man who knew their limits, who anticipated every reaction, who had turned the forest into a weapon. Caleb motioned them forward again. The ground began to slope upward, leading to a narrow ridge where the trees thinned. He knew this was part of the sniper's plan. The ridge would leave them exposed, easy targets, and the sniper would use every advantage to pick them off. "Keep moving," Caleb whispered. "Do not stop, do not hesitate." The men pressed on, each step a struggle. Boone groaned with pain, Walker's hands shook violently, and Caleb's muscles screamed from exhaustion, but there was no turning back. The sniper had drawn them into his game, and every hesitation could be fatal. As they reached the top of the ridge, Caleb saw the signs, broken twigs, disturbed leaves, and the faintest impressions of footprints that did not belong to any of them. The ghost sniper had been here recently. He had left these markers intentionally, guiding them, testing them, and ensuring they remained exactly where he wanted them. A shot rang out. Boone screamed as a bullet grazed his shoulder, sending him stumbling. Caleb fired blindly into the trees, but the sniper was already gone, vanished into the fog like smoke. "Keep going," Caleb shouted. "Move!" They descended into a narrow ravine, the walls steep and jagged. The river flowed swiftly below, the water dark and cold. The terrain was treacherous, forcing them to balance on loose rocks and mud. Caleb could feel the sniper's presence close now, orchestrating every step. Every misstep could be their last. Then the first trap revealed itself. A tree limb, bent and rigged with tension, snapped forward like a whip, narrowly missing Caleb's head. Boone cried out, and Walker stumbled, almost falling into the river. The sniper had designed the trap perfectly, using the terrain to control them, to weaken them, to instill terror. Caleb cursed under his breath, realizing the extent of the ghost sniper's planning. This was not a man who acted on impulse. Every movement had been calculated. Every obstacle had been anticipated. They were trapped, not by walls or cages, but by the forest itself, and by the man who had mastered it. They continued, moving cautiously, every step a battle against the terrain and the fear gnawing at their minds. The fog thickened again, and the sniper's presence was everywhere. Shots rang out intermittently, forcing them to duck and weave through the underbrush. Boone's leg was bleeding badly, and Walker was close to collapse, but Caleb pressed on. They had to survive. They had to keep moving. By late afternoon they reached a small clearing where the river widened. Caleb scanned the area, noting the subtle signs, a pile of stones arranged deliberately, leaves disturbed in unnatural patterns, and small depressions in the mud. The ghost sniper had been here, and the signs were warnings. "He's watching us," Caleb whispered, "and he's not alone. Look for the marks, watch the terrain. Every step is part of his plan." Boone groaned, leaning on Caleb. "We can't keep this up. He's everywhere." Caleb shook his head. "He's not everywhere. He's anticipating us. And if we stay focused, if we move smart, we survive." The men pressed on, following the sniper's trail through the thickening fog. The riverbank became narrower, the trees pressing closer, roots tangling underfoot. Every step required vigilance, every breath measured. The sniper's game was relentless, testing their endurance, their nerves, their ability to function under fear. Then, just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, a shot rang out. Boone screamed as a bullet tore through the dirt at his feet. Caleb returned fire blindly, but the sniper was already gone. The forest seemed to close in, alive with the anticipation of their terror. Caleb realized the full extent of the danger. The ghost sniper had turned the forest itself into a weapon, using every tree, every shadow, every bend in the river to control them, to isolate them, to strike fear into their hearts. They were no longer hunters, they were prey. By nightfall, exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. Boone was barely able to stand, Walker was pale and shaking, and Caleb himself was bleeding from minor cuts and bruises, his body screaming in protest. Yet they pressed on, driven by the desperate need to survive, to reach some unknown refuge, to escape the relentless presence of a man who had turned the art of hunting into a weapon of terror. A faint whistle carried through the fog, melodic and taunting. Caleb froze, raising his rifle. The ghost sniper was near. Watching. Wait. And as the men pressed forward into the darkness, they realized the truth. They were trapped in a game from which there was no simple escape. Every shot fired, every shadow glimpsed, every trap encountered was part of the ghost sniper's plan. He was not merely hunting them, he was orchestrating a symphony of fear, turning the landscape itself into an instrument of death. By midnight they were forced to make camp, huddled in the narrow ravine, exhausted and terrified. Caleb kept watch, eyes scanning the shadows, ears straining for the faintest sound. Boone moaned softly, leaning against a tree. Walker sat huddled, pale and trembling. Caleb's mind raced, calculating their next move, anticipating the sniper's strategy. He knew one thing with absolute certainty: the hunters who had thought themselves predators were now prey, and the ghost sniper had complete control over the battlefield. The forest whispered around them, alive with anticipation. And somewhere in the shadows, the ghost sniper waited, patient, lethal, inevitable. By the first light of dawn, the hunters would understand fully that their pursuit had turned into a trap from which only one could hope to survive. The ghost sniper had transformed the forest into his weapon, and the hunters were caught, ensnared in a deadly game they could not yet comprehend. The forest around them seemed to pulse with life, each shadow moving with intent, each rustle of leaves carrying the weight of unseen eyes. Caleb Rourke led the remaining hunters, Boone and Walker, through the narrow ravine, dragging Boone along carefully, his wounded legs slowing their progress. The fog hung heavy, curling around the gnarled tree trunks like fingers reaching to clutch them, and the river to their left whispered an ominous warning as it rushed over rocks and fallen timber. Caleb's muscles burned, his lungs ached, and his mind spun with exhaustion, yet he could not stop. Every step they took was watched, every breath could be counted. Caleb's instincts screamed at him as they moved through the forest. He had been a hunter all his life, tracking men and animals alike, but this pursuit was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The ghost sniper was not just skilled, he was patient, calculating, and utterly in control. He manipulated the environment itself, using the fog, the river, the trees, even the wind, to remain unseen while dictating the hunter's every movement. Boone groaned beside him, leaning heavily on Caleb's shoulder. I can't go much farther," he whispered. Pain etched across his face. Caleb shot him a sharp look. "You'll go farther, you have to. We survive or we die here. No choice." Walker's hands shook violently as he helped support Boone. "He's everywhere," Walker said. "I can feel him. Every shadow, every sound." Caleb did not respond. He had felt it too, the eerie sensation of being watched, studied, stalked. Every instinct he possessed told him that the ghost sniper was close, yet no trace of him appeared, no form, no shadow, nothing to strike. He was a phantom, a master of anticipation, and every move Caleb made seemed to be anticipated, countered, manipulated. The trail led them into a shallow riverbed, the water cold and shallow, running over smooth stones and mud. Caleb knelt, examining the area carefully. Something caught his eye, a faint glint of metal among the river rocks. He reached down, brushing aside mud and leaves, and revealed a small, worn bullet casing. Caleb's stomach tightened. He recognized it immediately. The initials engraved on the casing matched those from reports he had read years earlier during the Civil War, reports of a soldier known only as the Ghost Sniper, a man who had survived battles thought impossible, a man whose skill with a rifle had become legendary. The very man they hunted now had left a sign for them to find, a message hidden in plain sight. "This isn't random," Caleb muttered under his breath. "He's leaving messages. Rem. Inders. Warnings." Walker leaned closer, fear painted across his pale face. A warning of what? Caleb studied the casing, turning it over in his hand. Of what he's capable of. He's telling us, "I know you. I've been here before, and I know how you think." Boone groaned again, gripping Caleb's arm. "I don't want to know. I don't want to know any more. I just want to get out." Caleb tightened his grip on Boone. "We survive because we know. That's why we keep moving." The hunters pressed on, following the faint impressions in the mud and the occasional broken branch, each step bringing them deeper into the sniper's carefully orchestrated trap. The riverbank narrowed, and the trees leaned inward, forming a natural corridor that funneled them toward the sniper's next choice of ambush. Then came the first sign of deliberate manipulation. A series of footprints appeared ahead, not matching any of their own, and leading to a fallen tree that spanned the river like a bridge. Caleb's eyes narrowed. The Ghost Sniper had created an obstacle, guiding them into a position where he could strike from any angle. "Stay low," Caleb whispered, voice taut. "He wants to see how we react." Walker's hands were slick with sweat as they crossed the log. Every movement made the timber creak, and Caleb knew that even the slightest sound could draw a deadly response. He focused on every detail, the way the log shifted under their weight, the subtle movements in the branches above, the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off metal somewhere in the trees. Then the shot came, a single crack, sharp and precise, ripped through the air. The bullet struck the log near Caleb's foot, splintering it and sending a sharp pain up his leg. Boone cried out beside him, losing his balance, and Caleb caught him just in time. "He's teaching us," Caleb muttered. "Every shot, every movement, it's a lesson." Walker shook his head violently. "I can't learn from this. I'm going to die." "You're not," Caleb said firmly. "We adapt. We survive. That's all we do." They pressed forward cautiously, Boone leaning heavily on Caleb, Walker trembling beside them. Every footstep required vigilance. Every rustle of leaves could be a warning. The Ghost Sniper was patient, striking only when the moment was perfect and disappearing before retaliation could be mounted. By midday, they reached a small clearing, the river bending sharply around it. Caleb knelt, examining the ground, and noticed something new, a small pendant, partially buried in the mud. His heart skipped. He recognized it immediately. It had belonged to a young man he had pursued during the war, a boy named Isaiah, whose fate Caleb had thought long sealed. The pendant had been torn from the boy's neck during a chase years earlier, a cruel reminder of Caleb's past. Now it lay deliberately placed in their path. "It's him," Caleb whispered, voice tight with realization. "He's been here. He's been waiting, and he remembers the past." Walker's voice was a tremor. "The boy, he survived." Caleb did not answer immediately. He picked up the pendant, examining it. The Ghost Sniper had not only anticipated their movements, but had studied them, understood them, and now used their past sins and failures against them. Every mark, every trap, every warning was a reflection of the man they hunted, and the vengeance he carried. Boone groaned, leaning heavily on Caleb. "I don't want to know about the past. I just want to get out alive." Caleb's jaw tightened. "The past is why he's here. The past is why we're in this trap, and the past is why we survive or die." The trail continued, winding through dense underbrush, the sniper's presence felt but never seen. Every step they took seemed guided, every movement anticipated. Caleb could see now that the Ghost Sniper was not merely hunting them for sport or bounty. He was teaching, punishing, orchestrating a reckoning for every life stolen, every injustice endured, every fear stilled. As the afternoon wore on, the fog returned, curling around their legs and muffling sound. Caleb led them carefully, every sense on high alert. The sniper's traps became more elaborate, branches rigged to swing, stones arranged to mislead, marks carved into trees to signal danger. Each trap was a lesson, a warning, a message. A shot rang out suddenly, striking a tree inches from Boone. The log beneath his feet cracked, splintering under the pressure. Caleb dove, dragging Boone behind a fallen tree for cover. Walker's breath came in short, terrified gasps. "He's everywhere!" Walker cried. "Everywhere!" Caleb's eyes narrowed. "No, he's not everywhere. He's anticipating us. Every step we take, every sound we make, he's already thought of it. That's why we survive, because we adapt." They pressed on, dragging Boone carefully, following the subtle signs the sniper had left behind. The pendant, the bullet casing, the carved marks, they were all pieces of a message, a map, and a warning. Caleb studied each one, understanding that survival depended on reading them correctly. By evening they reached a small rise overlooking the river. Caleb knelt, examining the terrain carefully. The sniper had led them here intentionally, a vantage point where he could observe without being seen. Every mark in the soil, every disturbed branch, every broken twig was deliberate. The hunters were no longer in control. The ghost sniper had orchestrated every moment. A faint whistle carried through the fog, melodic, taunting. Caleb froze, listening. The sniper was near, and he knew it. Every instinct told Caleb to move, to stay vigilant, to anticipate the next strike. Then the final sign appeared, a single worn rifle casing, engraved with the initials Caleb recognized from the Civil War. The ghost sniper had left it here deliberately, a message that he remembered, that he had planned, that he controlled everything. Caleb understood fully now. The hunters were not pursuing the ghost sniper. They were being guided, manipulated, tested. Every trap, every shot, every subtle mark had been calculated. The ghost sniper was teaching them, punishing them, and demonstrating that the hunter could be hunted. Boone groaned beside him, pain etched into every line of his face. Walker shivered violently, whispering prayers under his breath. Caleb's muscles screamed, his mind raced, but he forced himself to focus. Survival depended on understanding the man they chased, on anticipating his next move, and on enduring every lesson he delivered. The forest seemed to pulse around them, alive with anticipation. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, every shifting branch was part of the sniper's control. And Caleb knew, with icy certainty, that the hunters were trapped in a game far larger than they had imagined, a game where the past, the present, and the ghost sniper's vengeance converged with lethal precision. The fog had thickened by the time Caleb led Boone and Walker down the narrow valley, the river's constant murmur now mingling with the whispers of the forest. Every shadow seemed alive, every branch a potential weapon. Caleb's body ached, muscles screaming from the relentless march, from carrying Boone's weight, from gripping his rifle for hours on end. But exhaustion was a luxury they could not afford. The ghost sniper had orchestrated every step they took, and Caleb knew that slowing down or hesitating would be fatal. Boone groaned beside him, leaning heavily on Caleb's shoulder, his leg a dark smear of dried blood. I can't go anymore," he whispered, voice barely audible above the rustle of leaves. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You will, you have to, there's no choice. We survive or we die here." Walker stumbled behind them, pale, trembling, and muttering prayers under his breath. "He's everywhere. I can feel him, every sound, every shadow." Caleb's eyes swept the tree line. He had felt it too, the eerie sense that the forest itself was watch, alive with the sniper's presence. He could see now that the ghost sniper's power was not just in marksmanship, it was in psychology, in manipulation, in control over the minds of those who dared follow him. The trail narrowed into a dense stand of cedars. The ground was uneven, slick with mud, roots rising like the fingers of the dead to trip the unwary. Caleb led cautiously, every step deliberate, listening for the faintest whisper of movement. A single misstep could be enough to alert the sniper to their position. Then came the first ambush. A branch snapped sharply from above, startling the horses and forcing Boone to cry out. A bullet hissed past them, striking a tree trunk mere inches from Caleb's head. The sniper's precision was terrifying. He had anticipated their path, their movement, even the exact height they would stand at. Every shot was a message: fear is mine, and every step you take is mine to command." Walker shivered violently. "We're dead. We're all dead. He's everywhere." Caleb shook his head, voice low and firm. "No, he's not everywhere. He's anticipating us. That's why we survive, by staying calm, by moving carefully, by not panicking." They pressed on, dragging Boone along, every muscle screaming in protest. The forest seemed to close around them, every tree a barrier, every shadow a potential threat. The sniper's game was psychological as well as physical, and Caleb realized the toll it was taking. Boone was weakening, Walker was trembling, and Caleb himself felt the creeping edge of desperation. By midday they reached a narrow ridge overlooking the river, the water cutting through the landscape like a silver knife. Caleb knelt, examining the ground carefully. Broken twigs, disturbed leaves, and faint impressions in the mud told him the ghost sniper had been here, watching, waiting, manipulating. Every detail was deliberate. "He's here," Caleb whispered, voice taut with tension, "and he's not alone. Look at the marks. Every step we take, he's thought of it. Every trap, every shot. It's his plan." Boone groaned, gripping Caleb's arm. "I don't want to know. I don't want to know any more. I just want to get out alive." Caleb's jaw tightened. Survival requires understanding. Understanding requires seeing the path he's laid before us. We follow it or we die. There's no other way. The path led them into a narrow ravine, the walls steep and jagged. Mud and loose stones made footing treacherous, forcing Caleb to focus on every step. The sniper's presence was palpable, even if unseen. Caleb knew the ghost sniper had allies, perhaps former slaves, sympathetic locals, or other soldiers who had fought alongside him during the war. The marks they saw, the disturbances in the foliage, the subtle signs, they were not random. They were guidance, manipulation, and warnings. Then came the next trap. A log, rigged with tension, snapped forward like a whip as they stepped onto it. Boone cried out, nearly toppling into the river, and Walker flinched violently. Caleb grabbed both of them, steadying them as his mind raced. The ghost sniper was testing them, isolating them, weakening them before the final confrontation. "He wants us to panic," Caleb muttered, "to make a mistake. Every trap, every shot, every sound is designed to push us to the edge. Don't give him that satisfaction." The hunters pressed forward, every step an exercise in precision. The river flowed beside them, cold and relentless, its roar mingling with the silence of the fog-drenched forest. Caleb could feel the sniper's eyes on them, and every instinct screamed that the ghost sniper knew their fears, their weaknesses, their exact limits. By late afternoon they reached a small clearing where the sniper had left another message, a worn rifle casing, engraved with initials Caleb recognized from his past. The sniper had been here deliberately, leaving this relic as both a warning and a test. Caleb's heart sank. The ghost sniper's plan was metic. Ulus, every detail accounted for. They were not following him, they were following his design. Boone leaned heavily on Caleb. I can't do this anymore," he whispered, voice weak. "You have to," Caleb said firmly. "We survive by moving, by thinking, by anticipating him. That's the only way." Walker shivered violently. "Every shadow, every sound, he's everywhere." "No," Caleb said. "He's anticipating us. That's the difference. And that's why we survive. Focus, stay calm, and move. That's all we do." Forest seemed to close around them as they pressed forward, every tree a potential threat, every shadow a possible trap. The sniper's influence was absolute. He had turned the environment into a weapon, controlling not just their movements but their minds. Fear was his tool, and he wielded it with precision. By evening, exhaustion had set in. Boone could barely stand, Walker trembled violently, and Caleb's own body ached with fatigue. Yet they could not stop. The ghost sniper's presence was too close, too immediate. Every step, every breath could trigger another ambush. Then came the next shot. A bullet struck the ground mere inches from Caleb's foot, sending mud and debris flying. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The sniper had demonstrated again that he was not just a marksman, but a master manipulator, controlling the battlefield and their movements with unmatched skill. Caleb's mind raced, calculating the next move, anticipating the sniper's strategy. Every trap, every subtle mark, every shift in the terrain was part of a larger plan. They were ensnared in a game from which there was no simple escape, a game in which only survival, cunning, and endurance could hope to prevail. They pressed on into the growing darkness, following the subtle signs the sniper had left behind, the bullet casings, the pendant, the marks on trees. Every clue was part of his plan, every detail deliberate, every moment calculated. Caleb understood fully now that the hunters were no longer in control. They were being guided, manipulated, tested. The forest seemed alive with anticipation. Shadows shifted, leaves rustled, and the river's murmur carried the weight of the sniper's presence. Caleb knew that the ghost sniper was patient, relentless, and inevitable. Every step, every breath, every movement was part of his design. By midnight, they were forced to make camp in a narrow ravine, huddled together, bruised, battered, and terrified. Caleb kept watch, eyes scanning the shadows, ears straining for the faintest sound. Boone moaned softly, leaning against a tree. Walker shivered violently, muttering prayers. Caleb's mind raced. The ghost sniper's mastery of the forest, of anticipation, and of psychology was absolute. They had been drawn into a trap, manipulated at every turn, and their fear was now as much a weapon against them as the sniper's rifle. The night passed slowly, filled with the sounds of the forest and the occasional crack of distant branches. Every noise was a potential ambush. Every movement in the fog could signal the sniper's approach. Caleb remained alert, muscles tense, mind focused. Survival depended on anticipation, adaptation, and endurance. By the first light of dawn, Caleb understood the truth. The hunters had become prey in every sense of the word. The ghost sniper had isolated them, manipulated them, and pushed them to the brink of terror. Every trap, every shot, every subtle mark had been part of his plan, and the hunters would have to confront the full extent of his mastery if they hoped to survive. The forest had become a labyrinth of shadows and whispered threats. Every tree, every twisted root, every fallen branch seemed alive with intent, each one a potential hiding place for the ghost sniper. Caleb's muscles screamed in protest as he forced Boone and Walker along the narrow, winding trail, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands. The cold mud of the riverbank clung to their boots, and the fog, thick and suffocating, blurred the line between reality and illusion. Every step they took seemed measured by an unseen hand, every sound amplified by the silence of the night. Boone stumbled, his injured leg dragging through the mud, and Caleb caught him just in time. "Keep moving," he hissed, voice low but firm. "Don't stop. Every second we hesitate, he wins." Walker's hands shook violently as he helped steady Boone. I can't take this much longer," he whispered, voice trembling. "He's everywhere. I can feel him." Caleb's eyes scanned the trees, sharp and unrelenting. "He's not everywhere," he muttered. "He's anticipating us. That's the difference. Remember that." The sniper's presence was palpable. Every rustle of leaves, every faint snap of a twig, every shift in the fog seemed intentional, calculated. Caleb realized that the ghost sniper was no longer just a marksman, he was a master manipulator, controlling the forest itself and every step they took within it. The hunters were no longer in control, they were being led, tested, and broken by a predator who had mastered patience and fear. A sudden crack split the air. A bullet ricocheted off a nearby tree, sending a splinter into Boone's shoulder. He cried out, stumbling, and Caleb lunged to steady him. The sniper had chosen his distance and angle perfectly, striking without revealing his position. The forest seemed to tremble with anticipation, a living entity echoing the sniper's will. Caleb whispered sharply, "Stay low, move quietly, do not draw attention." They pressed on, dragging Boone along the muddy trail. The sniper's strategy was evident now: isolate them, weaken them, and force mistakes. Every footfall, every breath, every movement was observed, anticipated, and manipulated. The ghost sniper's control over the battlefield was absolute. As they entered a narrow valley, Caleb noticed the subtle signs: the slight depression in the mud where someone had knelt, the faint scratches on tree bark, and the occasional glint of metal partially buried under leaves. The ghost sniper had been here, and these were deliberate messages, warnings, and traps. Caleb realized that each step they took was guided by the sniper's hand, every choice influenced by his unseen presence. A sudden whistle drifted through the fog, melodic and taunting. Caleb froze, motioning for the others to do the same. The sniper was near, testing their nerves, forcing them to second-guess every instinct. Then, without warning, the first direct confrontation occurred. A figure appeared briefly atop a ridge, rifle raised, eyes pale and cold. Caleb's heart pounded. The ghost sniper had allowed them a glimpse, a fleeting moment to instill terror and assert control. The shot rang out, precise and deadly. A bullet struck a tree beside Caleb, sending splinters flying. Boone cried out, staggering, and Walker fell to his knees, shaking uncontrollably. Caleb returned fire blindly, but the sniper was gone, vanished into the fog like smoke. The hunters were trapped in a deadly game of anticipation and fear, unable to strike at an enemy they could barely perceive. Caleb's mind raced. He had been a hunter all his life, but this was different. This was not a simple chase. This was a war of wills, a battle of minds, where the terrain itself had become a weapon. Every trap, every shot, every subtle mark was calculated to manipulate their emotions, weaken their resolve, and force them into mistakes. The trail led them into a dense thicket, branches tangling and clawing at their faces and clothes. The sniper's presence was close but invisible, his strikes precise and calculated. Caleb could feel the tension in the air, a silent pressure pressing down on them, and he knew that the next phase of the sniper's plan was imminent. A shot rang out again, striking a tree above them, and the vibration of the bullet sent Boone to the ground. Caleb dragged him behind a fallen log, the mud sticky and cold beneath. Walker cowered beside them, trembling, whispering prayers. Caleb's voice was tight with control. "We survive by moving, by staying calm, by anticipating him. Do not panic, do you understand?" Walker nodded weakly and Boone groaned. Caleb's mind raced, calculating their next move. He knew the sniper had isolated them, manipulating the terrain, the fog, and their fear. The only way to survive was to anticipate the sniper's strategy, to stay one step ahead mentally, even if physically they were at his mercy. The forest narrowed, funneling them into a natural corridor. Caleb recognized the pattern. This was another trap, a location chosen to give the sniper maximum advantage. Every branch, every root, every shadow was positioned to disorient and threaten. A whistle pierced the air, longer this time, almost a song of triumph. Caleb froze, listening. The sniper was near, observing, calculating. Every instinct screamed to move, but every instinct also screamed to wait, to anticipate, to survive. Then the sniper struck again. A shot rang out, striking Boone in the side. He cried out, collapsing into the mud. Caleb grabbed him, dragging him to cover, his muscles burning with exertion. Walker stumbled behind them, pale and shaking. Caleb's jaw tightened. "We survive by moving, we survive by staying calm, we adapt." They pressed on, moving through the fog and shadows, every step a test of nerve, endurance, and skill. The sniper's traps became more elaborate, fallen logs rigged to trip, stones arranged to mislead, branches set to swing, each one calculated to separate them, weaken them, and strike terror into their hearts. By nightfall, the hunters were exhausted, bruised, and terrified. Boone could barely move, Walker trembled violently, and Caleb's muscles ached with fatigue. Yet they pressed on, driven by the desperate need to survive, and the understanding that stopping would mean death. The sniper's presence was everywhere, yet invisible. Every shot, every whistle, every subtle clue reinforced the truth. They were prey, and the ghost sniper was the predator. Every moment of hesitation, every misstep, every fearful glance could be their last. Caleb realized that this man was not only skilled with a rifle, but had mastered psychological warfare. He understood fear, anticipation, and human weakness. The sniper's strategy was not only to kill, but to break them mentally, to manipulate them into mistakes, to isolate them emotionally and physically. As they approached a narrow bridge crossing the river, Caleb noted the subtle disturbances in the mud, footprints, broken twigs, and faint scratches on the railing. The sniper had anticipated their path and prepared his final trap. A whistle carried through the fog, melodic and taunting. Caleb froze, listening. The sniper was near, observing and calculating. Every instinct screamed that they were moments from the first of many deadly confrontations. Then the first shot rang out. A bullet struck Boone in the leg, throwing him to the ground. Caleb lunged to steady him, returning fire blindly, but the sniper was gone, vanished into the fog. Walker collapsed to his knees, trembling violently. "We're going to die," he whispered, voice barely audible. "No," Caleb said firmly. "We survive because we adapt. We survive because we anticipate. That's the only way." The forest seemed to pulse around them, alive with the sniper's control. Every shadow, every rustle, every whisper was part of his plan. Caleb understood fully now that the hunters were trapped in a game of anticipation, fear, and survival, and the snipers' mastery over the environment and their minds was absolute. By midnight, the hunters were forced to make camp in a narrow ravine. Boone was badly wounded, Walker trembling violently, and Caleb himself battered and exhausted. The forest whispered around them, alive with anticipation, and Caleb knew that the ghost sniper's next moves would be decisive. The night passed Owly, filled with the sounds of the forest and the occasional crack of distant branches. Caleb remained alert, every sense focused on detecting the sniper's presence. The hunters had become prey, and the ghost sniper's mastery of terrain, psychology, and marksmanship meant that survival was uncertain. By first light, Caleb understood fully that the final confrontation was imminent. The hunters had been drawn into the sniper's trap, isolated and manipulated. Every shot, every whistle, every subtle sign had been calculated. They were in the ghost sniper's world now, and only by staying vigilant, adapting, and anticipating could they hope to survive the deadly game that awaited them. The fog hung low and heavy over the river valley, clinging to the trees and ground like a suffocating blanket. Caleb pressed Boone and Walker forward, each step a battle against exhaustion, fear, and the relentless presence of the ghost sniper. Boone's breathing was ragged, his leg a dark, bloody smear from where he had been struck. Walker's hands shook violently, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent him into near panic. Caleb's own muscles ached, his senses straining to anticipate the sniper's next move, but he knew that hesitation could cost them their lives. They reached the narrow bridge Caleb had glimpsed the night before, spanning the river like a fragile line between safety and doom. The sniper had been here, leaving subtle signs, the bent railing, slight depressions in the mud, and broken twigs deliberately placed along the path. Caleb knelt to examine the ground, noticing that the disturbances formed a pattern, almost like a code. The ghost sniper had been guiding them, manipulating them, drawing them toward a location of his choosing. "Stay low," Caleb whispered to the others. "Every step, every sound counts. He's waiting for us." Boone groaned, leaning heavily on Caleb. I can't do this anymore," he said, voice trembling. "You can," Caleb said firmly. "We survive by moving, by staying alert, by anticipating him. That's all we do." Walker's eyes were wide with terror. "He's everywhere. I can feel him, every shadow." "No," Caleb said. "He's not everywhere. He's anticipating us. That's why we survive." The bridge creaked under their weight, and Caleb forced each step carefully, feeling the tension in the wood and mud. The sniper's influence was palpable, the anticipation of the trap radiating from the forest itself. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow suspicious, and Caleb realized that the ghost sniper had turned the entire environment into a weapon. A faint whistle drifted through the fog, melodic and mocking. Caleb froze, signaling the others to do the same. The sniper was near, observing, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then the first shot came. A bullet struck the railing of the bridge near Caleb's head, splintering the wood. Boone cried out, nearly toppling over. Caleb grabbed him, dragging him to the side, and fired blindly into the fog. The sniper had vanished, already repositioned, his mastery of concealment absolute. Caleb's mind raced. He had been a hunter all his life, but this was different. This was not a simple chase. This was a battle of wits, of anticipation, of survival under extreme pressure. The ghost sniper had isolated them, manipulated them, and broken their nerves, turning every instinct against them. The trail led them into a dense thicket on the far side of the bridge, and Caleb realized that the sniper had funneled them here deliberately. Every subtle sign, every disturbance in the mud, every glint of metal in the underbrush, it was all part of the plan. The hunters were no longer in control. They were being herded into a confrontation on the sniper's terms. Boone whimpered, leaning heavily on Caleb's shoulder. I can't go any farther." "Yes, you can," Caleb said firmly. "We survive because we adapt. We survive because we anticipate. That's the only way." Walker trembled violently beside them, whispering prayers under his breath. "We're going to die." Caleb shook his head. "Not if we move smart, not if we stay focused. Every step counts, every breath counts. Do you understand?" The forest seemed to close around them as they pressed forward, every tree a potential hiding place for the sniper, every shadow a potential threat. Caleb's senses were stretched to their limits, his mind working faster than his body could move, calculating angles, predicting the sniper's strategies, and trying to keep Boone and Walker safe. Then the sniper revealed himself fully for the first time. A figure emerged from the fog atop a small rise, rifle raised, eyes pale and sharp. Caleb froze, recognizing the unmistakable posture, the lethal precision of the man he had been hunting. The ghost sniper was real, alive, and more dangerous than any rumor or report could have conveyed. The sniper fired. The shot struck a tree between Caleb and Boone, sending splinters flying. Another bullet grazed Boone's shoulder. Caleb fired back blindly, but the sniper moved like smoke, vanishing into the mist, already out of sight before retaliation was possible. Walker screamed, stumbling backward. "He's going to kill us!" Caleb grabbed him. "No, we survive. Stay low. Keep moving." The sniper's attacks became relentless. Shots rang out from every angle, some aimed, some to terrify, all calculated. The forest itself seemed to obey him, every rustle, every shadow, every crack of a branch designed to instill fear, to manipulate, to control. The hunters were prey, and the ghost sniper was the predator, orchestrating every step. Caleb realized that the sniper's strategy was not merely to kill, it was to break them mentally, to isolate them, to turn fear into a weapon. Every shot, every trap, every subtle sign was part of a larger plan. They were being hunted on every level, physically, psychologically, emotionally. By dusk, Boone could barely stand, Walker was trembling violently, and Caleb was exhausted beyond measure. Yet they pressed on, driven by the desperate need to survive. Every step brought them closer to the sniper's chosen location, every breath a test of nerve and endurance. Then came the final ambush. The ghost sniper struck from a concealed position atop a ridge, firing shot after shot with lethal precision. Boone fell to the ground screaming as Caleb dragged him behind cover. Walker collapsed beside them, shaking uncontrollably. Caleb returned fire blindly, but the sniper was already gone, vanishing like a phantom. Caleb's mind raced. He knew they could not outrun him, they could not overpower him. The only way to survive was to anticipate, to outthink, to endure. Every instinct he possessed screamed that the final confrontation was near, that the sniper had chosen this moment to decide their fates. The fog thickened, swirling around them, obscuring vision and sound. Caleb could feel the sniper's presence, close now, almost tangible. Every subtle movement of the trees, every whisper of the wind, every shift in the mist was a sign, a warning, a part of the sniper's strategy. Caleb positioned Boone and Walker behind a fallen log, whispering instructions. "Stay low. Do not move. Watch for movement. Every shadow could be him." The sniper fired again. A bullet struck the log, splintering the wood, and Caleb felt the heat of the impact. He fired in return, catching a glimpse of the sniper's pale eyes before he disappeared into the fog. Caleb knew the sniper had planned this meticulously. Every trap, every shot, every warning had been calculated to bring them here, to isolate them, to force them into a confrontation where only one outcome could occur unless they adapted. Hours passed. The fog thinned slightly with the approaching dawn. The hunters remained huddled behind their cover, muscles aching, nerves frayed, minds exhausted. Caleb realized that survival depended not on strength, no, on speed, but on patience, observation, and cunning. Then the sniper struck again. A single precise shot hit a tree inches from Caleb's head. He fired in response, but the sniper vanished once more, leaving only the echo of his presence. Caleb's mind raced, analyzing every sign, every mark, every subtle shift in the forest. He realized the sniper had underestimated one thing, their determination to survive. Fear alone could not break them, exhaustion alone could not stop them. They had endured, adapted, and learned from every trap, every shot, every subtle warning. As the sun began to rise, casting pale light through the mist, Caleb spotted movement atop a ridge, a faint shimmer of a rifle, a pale figure, eyes sharp and calculating. The final confrontation was at hand. Caleb steadied his rifle, drawing a deep, controlled breath. Boone groaned beside him, Walker trembling violently. "Stay focused," Caleb whispered. Every shot counts, every movement counts. We survive by anticipating him, by staying calm, by enduring. This ends now. The sniper fired. Caleb returned fire, his pulse pounding, muscles tense. The fog swirled, shadows shifted, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Each shot was calculated, precise, lethal, and each one brought them closer to the inevitable confrontation. Finally, after what felt like hours, the sniper's position was revealed. He stepped from the shadows, rifle lowered, eyes meeting Caleb's. The forest was silent, the fog lifting slightly, and for a moment predator and hunter faced each other in the cold light of dawn. Caleb knew the battle was not over, but in that moment he understood the ghost sniper's power, and his own. Survival depended on courage, cunning, and the will to endure. The hunter had become the hunted, but the hunted had learned, adapted, and now faced the final reckoning. The confrontation would decide who survived, who fell, and who would leave the forest alive to tell the tale of the ghost sniper, a man whose legend had been forged in war, cruelty, and vengeance, and who had turned the hunters into prey with a mastery of skill, patience, and terror unlike anything they had ever faced.